Sponsored by the Big 98, Nashville's #1 for new country and the home of the Bobby Bones Show.
We're so thrilled to have on the show author, playwright, screenwriter with a great new book out that you need to get a copy of, Paula Blackman. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
You know, after reading your book and obviously digging into this, I feel like I know you and your family history now.
You probably do.
I mean,
yeah.
15 years of research to put this together. Night Train to Nashville, the greatest untold story of Music City.
That's right.
And you and I were talking because we're both huge fans of R&B music. And it's like, but this is the history of Nashville with your grandfather.
That is so
You
true.
are a sixth generation
That's
Nashvillian.
right. Yes, I am.
And a lot of people, unfortunately, don't know the history of WLAC.
I know if you have lived in Nashville long enough, you don't recognize this city at all.
Right.
Like when I was in the first grade, when I started first grade, I think the population was maybe all of 400,000. And when my family had been here 6 generations, I was related to half the town.
Right.
We couldn't go anywhere without running into relatives. And so essentially there were no secrets. And so those no secrets are showing up in the book. They're no longer
Well, you know, but
secrets.
I mean, also I've got to bring this up. You've got Spider Harrison, you know, raving about this, and so many others, and I know the critics have really responded positively about it because you've really encapsulated so much history here, and talked with the people obviously around your grandfather.
Right. Well, you know, I think one of the very, very first interviews I did was with Spider Harrison, you know, so we're talking about,
Wow.
now that was like 18 years ago. And he stayed in touch with me all those years. And then when I finally finished the manuscript, he was the person I sent it to, and I said, Spider, if there is anything in here that's incorrect, if you find any inconsistency, something that's other than how you remember it,
Right.
please correct it.
Yeah.
You know, don't let it go out without, you know, being corrected. And he came to my house, he sat down and he said, it's perfect, don't change one word. And so that gave me the confidence to go out with it just like it was.
Well, and also you went through 5 fact checks.
That's right.
With
Because
Harper.
it's HarperCollins. You know, today there's a lot of self-published books out there
Right.
that don't go through any fact checks.
Right.
But to get to HarperCollins, which is such a prestigious publisher,
Oh my gosh,
and then
yes.
have HarperCollins go through it with their fact checkers, their copy editors, their legal department, I'm quite proud.
Well, you know,
that
and we've
it's-
got to talk about this too, because I mean, what you've done here is, you know, through the eyes, you know, of your grandfather, and I love the way you opened up with, like, you know, here's going to be the cast. You know, here are
Right.
the characters within the book. Here's
Yeah.
the timeline.
Right.
You know, certainly dealing with 1946 with WLAC, but you know, it's lost history.
That's
that
true.
people forget, and certainly so many people think of Nashville as country music city,
Exactly.
but there's more forms of music.
Right.
And when you go, you and I were talking about like the Blues Museum in Clarksville, and also, you know, the Delta Blues, B.B. King's Museum
Right.
in Indianola.
which is incredible.
WLAC is featured because that was the
Right.
radio station that brought,
Right.
you know, it was one of the biggest sticks. I think you even mentioned the broadcast went all the way to the Netherlands.
That's right. I mean, it went, you know, Korea, crazy places based on the atmospherics of the time.
Right.
You know, if the conditions were just right. They also determined that even though they said they were a 50,000 watt station, I don't understand all of the electronics, but I know with that split propagation signal and the location of where it was,
Right.
they were really, you know, transmitting at about 100,000 watts. And so they were really going much further than what the FCC had originally intended.
Well, you know,
they could pick it up all over.
And you go through it in the book, and you and I were talking before we came in studio to where, you know, when your grandfather really, you know, proposed having R&B music on WLAC, originally he was doing it for monetary reasons. He saw the opportunity.
100%. He was an opportunist seeing a giant untapped market.
Right.
Because back then the music wasn't called R&B. That was
No.
something WLAC created, John
Right.
R. specifically, even though Jerry Wexler took the credit.
Gets credited.
John R. used that term first. But They created it because there was no what was then called race music broadcast nationally on any station. There were maybe a few little like radio stations in garages, in little small areas, but there was no black music broadcast anywhere nationally in the country. And so this was considered very taboo. It was considered, racy, inappropriate for the airwaves. To listen to what they thought was inappropriate then, based on what's on the airwaves today, it's comical, really.
But also, I want to bring up that it's so well handled in the book too, to where your grandfather, the music changed him.
100%.
You and I were talking about his relationship with B.B. King and with so many other artists, to where it changed the person he was, to where he wanted this music to get out. He wanted to help these artists, help these bands.
He was probably the first person that broadcast changed, but he was far from the last. In fact, maybe I'd been working on it 7 years when I realized that basically what I was writing is the story of, Beethoven's famous quote that music can change the world. And this radio station and this broadcast did change the world.
Definitely.
And there's no coincidence in the fact that Music City, Nashville, became the first southern city to desegregate. Because when it came to music, just like when it came to sports, talent trumped everything else.
Totally.
So a musician, he didn't care if his piano player was black or white. He didn't care if the trumpet player, they just wanted the best musician. So even though Nashville was segregated, the music studios, the recording studios, they weren't segregated. They went for the best talent. Now, because of the circumstances of the time, sometimes the black musicians would actually be playing the music, and then the record would come out and it would credit a white musician and he'd get paid. And so in many respects, this story is really about racism set in the world of music and how music changed not just my grandfather from a racist to a civil rights activist. It changed the community, and then in fact changed the entire southeastern United States.
Well, and especially with the civil rights movement, being in motion at that time also, and the upheaval and people wanting change.
Exactly.
And the music, bringing in that attention more. And, we were talking about the New Era Club. And what a great venue. Sue owned multiple venues, and we were talking about, Etta James recording here in Nashville.
Yes, so specifically the New Era Club was the premier nightclub in Nashville of the Chitlin Circuit, which was a group of, black nightclubs during segregation. But the New Era Club was the finest, fanciest. They brought in the best talent. And so it was the original New Era Club was only 3 blocks from WLAC, where WLAC was at 4th and Church, and the New Era was at 4th and Charlotte. But there was a world of difference in those 3 blocks because that's where the city segregated. And so you had all of the black people going to the nightclubs, Charlotte to Jefferson, and then the white people would go, Church south, and it was like never the twain shall meet except for in the recording studio.
And then also with the underground
that's what I was going to say.
And where, you ended up, with the desegregation.
That is what happened, because first, it's desegregation or integration comes in the studio, but then once WLAC starts broadcasting this music nationwide, all of a sudden there are white teenagers tuning in. So first, the airways are desegregated by this broadcast, and then white teenagers start listening in. They were called the Under the Covers Club, because once the transistor radios came out, they would hide their transistor radios under their pillow because their parents didn't want them listening to this taboo music. There were famous artists that were covering the black music and putting it out, and then they would buy those records, the white teenagers would buy those records and put them on their stereo or on their dresser And then they'd hide the Little Richard records under their bed or in the drawers so that they could, you know, fool their parents into believing
because that was
if
the
they
real
could hear
deal.
the music in the distance that they were listening to the white cover of what was essentially the black music, because that was considered unacceptable.
Well, and you got to interview Little Richard too.
I did, and then but it was that white students listening to the black music. The first integrated concert at a college occurred here at TSU. It was in 1956. Little Richard was there, Fats Domino was there. It was on the TSU campus, and what happened was the TSU Student Council sent an invitation to the white colleges. They sent the invitations to Vanderbilt and Belmont.
Certainly.
And then the white students in Nashville showed up on the TSU campus, and everybody was expecting, you know, some kind of race riot or whatever, but instead they all just danced together, enjoyed the music together, and this was really the beginning of Nashville integration. It started with the music.
It's just, wow. Just what an incredible thing, but also that you took the time to document this. I mean, researching it, working on it for 15 years, validating everything.
That's right.
And then it had to be edited down.
That's
even,
right.
You know, from the huge book that you created.
Right.
I think this is one of those things, Paula, that it has to be a documentary at some point.
I hope so.
And I know it's available, you know, in Audible.
Right.
We got to talk about that, to where, you know, you wanted a specific voice for this.
That's right.
And they were sending you the voices. You didn't like anything, and then.
Yeah, that's right. Well, in my mind, and I think in most of the audience that actually listened to the broadcast then, they all identify with one DJ. His name was John Richburg. People know him as John R.
Yep.
He trained Wolfman Jack. I mean, you know, Alan Freed would call in every night to get John R.'s playlist.
Wow.
John R. was the R&B DJ.
Right.
And he had a very distinct voice, and I really wanted that voice. But when the Audible group at HarperCollins was sending me voiceovers, I was like, no, these guys all sound like modern day car commercials. I need the voice of John R. We got John R.'s son, Matt Richburg, who can mimic his father's voice. So when you listen to him doing like the Baby Chicks commercial, they were selling Baby Chicks through the mail, he sounds exactly like John R. So it's almost like you can hear it in the authentic voice that the listeners heard it then.
How incredible. And I wanted to bring this up too. Some of our viewers may not realize this. It's like, you haven't always been an author. I mean, you know, you started out in the jewelry business, and then through some unfortunate mishaps, you ended up starting to write as therapy. And then your stories have been all over Hollywood.
That's right. Well, let me say that my mother was a managing editor of newspapers. My father was in the newspaper business. So, you know, from about maybe age 12, I grew up reading and editing my mother's columns and things she was writing in the newspaper.
Right.
So I kind of had a little bit of a head start, but I saw the pressure she was always under for deadlines, and I just decided I didn't want to be in that business, but I still wrote every day.
Right.
And so I went into the diamond business and became quite successful in the diamond business, to the point that I was followed by Colombian thieves. I was beat up while I was in a red light, stopped at a red light while I was in my car. Another time I was slipped a date rape drug, thrown into a trunk of a rental car, was out for 5 hours, and I developed PTSD from those two instances. And the therapist told me that in order to recover from this, I should probably write it. So I wrote it, and then a world famous best-selling author, Leslie Waller, he wrote Dog Day Afternoon, Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
My goodness.
He read it and he was like, my God, girl, you know, you can write and we need to get this to Hollywood. I sold that story to Hollywood. I sold it as a series to Chris Albrecht himself, who was the creator of the original programming on HBO.
Right.
But always I wanted to get back to writing this story. I wanted to retell all the really incredible stories I'd heard my grandfather tell about B.B. King and about Little Richard and about how this whole broadcast started.
Right.
And so this story started as a screenplay, and as you know, screenplays are heavy in dialogue.
Right.
And so I wanted to hold on to that authentic dialogue, but at the same time be able to show the people who read it, this is a 100% true story.
Right.
So
it's a story of Nashville that, you know, like you said, it's a secret,
That's
but it's
right.
there,
That's
and you're
right.
bringing it to light.
So I put it out with footnotes so that people could go and look it up. You know,
Right.
you can go to newspapers.com or wherever and read these original stories so that you don't have to just learn the maybe 2 or 3 lines that I quote in
Right.
here. You can go read the entire history
You know,
yourself by following the footnotes.
And in your spare time, you're also doing a musical.
Yeah, we opened at the Franklin Theater Saturday night, Dearest Pauline. That's also...
Congratulations.
Thank you. That's also a true story that takes place from here in Nashville, and it's World War II based.
Just amazing.
Yeah.
You're doing so many great things. I want to make sure, you know, I know you're doing a lot of book signings, and I know they're selling out, and the book is available everywhere in all the major bookstores, also on Amazon, but I think people are going to want an autographed copy from you as
Thank
well.
you.
And I know how much of a hit it has been everywhere you've done it, even
Yes.
like we were talking on Jefferson Street, you know, at the museum, to where people were buying a copy, having you sign it, and just crying about the
That's
stories.
right. In fact, people came in and they were buying 10, 12 copies. And, you know, I was shocked to see grown men cry, thanking me for writing the story because the broadcast meant so much to them.
Definitely, to all of us. You know, with that music, with R&B,
That's
and it's
right.
like I told you coming into the studio today, I was listening to R&B on the radio, you know, to have the right mindset.
That's
You
right.
know, and I'm listening to, you know, Midnight Train to Georgia.
Right,
And
right.
it's like going, okay, I'm
And
in
one
the
of
right
the
headspace.
DJs on WLAC started Gladys
Right,
Knight.
totally, and it's
Haas
like all
Allen.
those connections.
Right,
Well, I want to
right.
make sure for our viewers, with your website, with social media, I know you're going to have more book signings coming up this next year, more great things. I think a documentary is just my
Thank you.
recommendation. Where can they get their copy of the book from you?
Well, you can get it on Amazon, but if you want a signed copy, my website is paulahope.com. Hope's my middle name, paulahope.com.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's an incredible book. If you're looking for something, if you enjoy the history of Nashville and of radio, particularly WLAC, R&B, the rhythm and blues music, you really need to get a copy of this. You're going to enjoy it as much as I have. Night Train to Nashville, the greatest untold story of Music City. Paula, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Eric.
And congratulations.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Sponsored by the Big 98, Nashville's #1 for new country and the home of the Bobby Bones Show.